Chapter 16 of Bearing with Other Men's Faults. When you observe in yourself or others anything amiss which you would feign but cannot cure, your duty in such cases is to endure it till God sees fit to order matters otherwise. And a duty this is highly reasonable if you consider that possibly it is much wiser and better that these faults should not be amended than they that should. It may be God permits them for the trial and increase of your patience and humility, without which all our virtues are of no great regard in His sight. But at the same time that you ought to bear, you are no less obliged to pray against them, to beg that the ill example of them may be no hindrance to you in your Christian course, and to implore the assistance of His grace for the bearing them in such a manner that the provocations arriving thence may never shake your temper, or betray you to any sinful, or so much as indecent excess of passion. If a man refuse to comply with good advice, or to reform upon admonitions and reproofs, you are not, after these offers of doing him service have been made and repeated, obliged to contend with him any longer. 'Tis better to commit the whole affair to God, and endeavor to effect that by your prayers, which your discourses could not do. Beseech Him, therefore, whose infinite wisdom knows how to bring good out of evil, that His will may be done and His name glorified, and that all who serve and worship Him may be led into such actions as most contribute to these ends and are well pleased in His sight. And when you have thus discharged your part, set yourself resolutely to bear the greatest infirmities and faults of your brethren without any disturbance. And for confirming this resolution, remember that you also have many failings of your own, by which the patience of other people will have its turn of being exercised. And if you do, as certainly you cannot but see this, think how unreasonable it is to expect you should make others in all particulars what you would have them to be, when you cannot so much as make yourself what you are sensible you ought to be. And indeed, nothing is more common than to express exceeding zeal in amending our neighbors, and mighty indignation against their vices or imperfections, while at the same time we neglect being at home and either quite overlook or seem highly contented with our own. We take pleasure in being severe upon others, but cannot endure to hear of our own faults. We are surprised and uneasy at the liberties they take with us, and wonder with what confidence they can pretend such interest in us. And yet there is nothing so extravagant which we do not think we have a right to expect, and resent it highly to be denied. We set up for reformers, declaim at the wickedness of the age, and are all for suppressing and punishing it by rigorous laws, and yet are unwilling that any check or restraint should be put upon our own freedoms. This shows how far we are from observing that great rule of equity, the loving our neighbor as ourselves, and from meting to others the same measure which we are content should be measured to us again. Further yet, supposing all men to be without faults, some excellences and virtues must be lost too. What would become of patience? What of forgiving and forbearing one another for Christ's sake? If there were no provocations to try our temper, and such there could not be if every man were perfect and did his duty, but as the present condition of the world is ordered, God hath furnished us with constant occasions of bearing one another's burthens. For there is no man lives without his failings, no man that is so happy as never to give offense, no man without his load of trouble, no man so sufficient as never to need assistance, none so wise but the advice of others may, at some time or another, be useful and necessary for him, and therefore we should think ourselves under the strongest engagements to comfort and relieve and instruct and admonish and bear with one another. Besides, we shall do well to reflect that afflictions and uneasy accidents are the clearest indication for a man's goodness and the degrees of his improvement. For we mistake extremely in imagining that anything which happens to us from without is the real cause of our doing, well or ill. Adversity does not make a virtue or vice, but exert and draw them into practice. It does not change the man from what he was, but only discover what he really is.